Do you hate listening to demands? Have you heard of pathological demand avoidance?
The What's Eating You podcast is a series of mental health topics that are designed to make you think, learn, educate, and validate. Enjoy the show.
Welcome back to another episode on the What is Eating You podcast. I'm your host and psychologist, Stephanie Giorgio. And as always, listen with your own discretion. Always seek psychological help. This is not a therapy type of podcast. It is educational, so always make sure you speak to a licensed professional with what is going on with you. Today we're going to explore a fascinating and relatively lesser known condition called pathological demand avoidance, or PDA. I recently did a TikTok on this and many people were asking about more detail, so I thought, why not do a podcast? We're going to discuss its diagnosis or presence and how it's connected with autism spectrum disorder and how it differs from oppositional defiant disorder, its links with ADHD, signs and symptoms, and treatment options. So let's dig right in. PDA, pathological demand avoidance, is an emerging condition or subtype that is linked to autism spectrum disorder in Australia. So I do believe that PDA is diagnosed as a separate condition in the UK and maybe in other parts of the world, but at the moment, PDA is a term used to describe a specific profile of individuals within the autism spectrum. So it's important to recognize it's not a standalone diagnosis in many diagnostic manuals, such as the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or the ICD-10, which is the International Classification of Diseases Manual. However, it's gaining recognition and understanding within the autism community and among professionals. So what is it? PDA is when individuals exhibit an extreme avoidance of demands and a high level of anxiety when faced with them. This demand avoidance can manifest in many aspects of people's lives, including school, home, and social settings. I do want to emphasize that it is seen in children, and I am going to talk about whether it can exist in adults in my frequently asked questions coming up. Now, what is autism? I believe we should define that as well. So autism, known as autism spectrum disorder, ASD, is a neurodevelopmental disorder that affects how a person thinks, communicates, and interacts with others and the world around them. It is characterized by a wide range of symptoms and behaviors that can vary in severity. Autism is often referred to as a spectrum disorder because it encompasses a diverse group of individuals who may experience it differently. So autism has key characteristics and it's different from ADHD. Yes, there's a lot of overlap, but it is essentially different. So people with ASD, autism, have social challenges. They often struggle with social interactions and may struggle with understanding and responding to social cues such as facial expressions, body language, and emotional states of others. They may find it hard to maintain friendships and prefer solitary activities. Whereas someone with ADHD, socially, they may be fine. They may thrive in social situations and thrive in friendships as well. Number 2, autism, there's communication differences. So some may also have a delayed speech development or struggle with a language disorder or other learning difficulties. So there's a high comorbidity with that as well. The third thing is repetitive behaviors. So one thing we do see in ASD that we don't typically see in ADHD are repetitive behaviors or restrictive interests. So this can include repetitive hand flapping, rocking, and intense focus on specific objects or topics such as trains or plants or whatever it may be. And people with ASD really need routine and sameness in their daily lives, and differences to their routine or disruptions in routine can cause a lot of stress and anxiety as well. Number 4 is sensory sensitivities. Many individuals with autism experience sensitivities. So this can be food sensitivities, clothing sensitivities. It can be light, sound, touch, taste, or smell. And these sensitivities can lead to a sensory overload or discomfort. The fifth thing is strengths and talents. It's important to note that individuals with autism can have really unique strengths and talents such as music, photographic memory, mathematics, and art. And I believe there's a special word for this. It's called savants. I think that's the word, where people do have a really gifted talent when they are on the autism spectrum. That is autism. Now, PDA, going back to it, is a profile of this. So when you think of pathological demand avoidance, this can include just day-to-day demands, brushing your teeth, getting ready for school, getting things done, and it can cause a lot of distress for the young individual. Now, we see it across settings, so it's not just at home or it's not just at school. The demand avoidance can be in many settings. You're probably wondering, well, how does it differ from oppositional defiant disorder? Now, oppositional defiant disorder is a disorder that is diagnosed in childhood. And whilst both conditions involve oppositional behaviour, they have distinct features. So ODD is a diagnosable condition in the DSM-5. It's a separate mental health condition. Now, PDA is often characterised by an intense need for control, a struggle with routine and structure, and a preference for avoiding demands at all cost, which is interesting because what we said earlier was that people with autism love routine and thrive on that. Whereas ODD is a more general behavioural disorder, which involves defiance, irritability, and a persistent pattern of negative, hostile, and defiant behaviour towards authority figures. So it's important to make that distinction. Now, while there isn't a direct diagnostic link between ADHD, it's not uncommon for individuals with PDA to exhibit ADHD-like symptoms. And remember, there's a lot of overlap with ASD and ADHD as well. So the impulsivity and inattention seen in ADHD can sometimes overlap with the difficulties that individuals with PDA face when managing their anxiety and demands, but the conditions are distinct. So what are some of the signs or symptoms that someone may be struggling with pathological demand avoidance? While it can vary from person to person, common signs include a strong desire for control, an avoidance of routine, an ability to use manipulative or socially skilled behaviour to avoid demands, and high levels of anxiety when faced with expectations. So for example, they might say, I can't do that, my stomach hurts, or I'm tired. So using reasons or excuses not to do the demands. And individuals with PDA may also display social communication difficulties and have difficulty with transition. So how is it treated? Well, essentially managing PDA involves a multidisciplinary approach. Strategies include a flexible and person-centered approach to managing demands and anxiety, because it really is about anxiety and avoiding anxiety. So we want to teach relaxation strategies. We want to make the demands seem less demanding and almost like a request or a question, or making the young person think that they are in control of the decision can often work. This can be done in play-based interventions, and social stories can be really helpful. However, the most interventions can just vary from person to person, so it really just depends on what suits the person best, and making sure that our parents are often involved. A frequently asked question I get is, can adults have pathological demand avoidance? And the answer is yeah. Whilst PDA is associated with children and adolescents, it can continue into adulthood. So I wouldn't say you wouldn't get diagnosed with this in adulthood, but it's usually someone with autism who is developing into adulthood, that profile can still be there. So as an adult, they may continue to struggle with demand avoidance, anxiety, and challenges as you grow older. So for example, getting into relationships, employment, and daily living tasks due to the extreme avoidance of demands and high levels of anxiety when faced with expectation. So it's the expectation of doing something that breeds really high anxiety, and then to avoid the anxiety, they avoid the demand. Before we wrap up today, I do want to give you some tips that I think could be useful if you're experiencing this type of behavior, either with your child or someone that you know, to try and help them. So the first one is using non-negotiable words, or trying to get rid of non-negotiable words. So for example, a no might be a response to what your adolescent or child views as a demand rather than a request. So the use of words such as need, must, or will may be triggering for kids who have PDA or autism. So these non-negotiables give them the impression that a decision has already been made. So what you want to try and do is be flexible with your words and your phrases. So try and reframe no to, is it okay with you if we didn't go to the park? How do you feel about going to the park after we've had lunch? Do you mind doing this? If you'd be happy to, I would really appreciate. When you finish this, could you then do this? That is one tip. The second thing is encourage shared involvement. So instead of saying you or you have to do this, saying words like us, we, or let's, and together. And this helps the person feel supported, and it also balances out that autonomy and decision making as well. So this could mean offering children 2 or 3 options in a situation so they feel empowered to make a decision rather than telling them the decision, because that can cause resentfulness and it can cause anger because the person feels they're being told what to do. The third tip is plan. So start to notice if your child with PDA has repetitive patterns of behavior. So don't treat them like isolated events, and plan for potential explosions or meltdowns. You know, when does your child act out? Are there certain triggers? What logical consequences can be expected as a result? Maybe this is around screen time. Maybe it's around activities or chores. So we want to try to teach lessons that come as rewards. So we want to try to get them to do behavior knowing that they're going to get a reward from it as well. So we want to sort of rephrase lessons as, instead of, oh, you have to do these tasks, as you get to do these, or doing this is going to get you this type of reward as well. As always, early intervention is very important, especially with young children. This isn't, I guess, an area that I work in a lot, but I really wanted to just shed some light on this and help anyone who may be wanting to know more about it. But the final thing is, if you do notice that your child's behavior is improving, acknowledging it. So really show that you care about their effort and you can see it, whether it's emotional, whether it's social, whether it's cognitive, whether it's physical. Really show that you're seeing their progress. We want to acknowledge, we want to validate, and we want to encourage the progress that you see your kid making. So remember, rewards reinforce behavior. And that's what we want to try to do. If you enjoyed this episode, I know it was a little bit different from what I usually talk about, please let me know. Or if you have a request for an episode, I really appreciate all your requests and your comments. So thank you so much for requesting this and commenting on my social media. You're amazing, and I'm very grateful to have this platform to speak. Thank you for being here. Have the best day, and I'll see you in the next episode.